Hi, friends. Welcome back to Igniting Imagination. I'm your host, Lisa Greenwood, and we are closing out this powerful season featuring our newest class of Locke Innovative Leaders. Throughout this season, we've met leaders who are stretching the church's imagination, leaders who are asking not just what ministry looks like, but what faithfulness demands in this moment. And I'm grateful to be joined again by my co-host, Dr. Kuecker. Aaron serves as CEO of Hope Chicago, an economic mobility initiative working to remove barriers to post-secondary success for 2 generations of families. Across his leadership, Aaron has consistently helped institutions rethink systems so that access, dignity, and opportunity are expanded rather than restricted. Aaron, it's always good to be in these conversations with you.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, it is great to be here. And we have been in the presence of such wisdom over the course of these podcasts.
We have. Much of your work, Aaron, has focused on the next generation, asking how institutions form young leaders for long-term impact. So when you think about younger Christians today, what do you sense they are longing for from the church when it comes to faith and justice?
Wow. Well, when I think about the young people that I have the opportunity to work around, a word that comes to my mind these days is the word earnest. I see in these young people an earnestness and a desire to be engaged in work that does real good. And when I hear them talk about local churches, I hear them want to be led in the way of Jesus. They want to see lives that make sense up against the life of Christ. I think in today's conversation, we're going to get a very good example of that.
That is absolutely true. We are honored to welcome Reverend Sandra Van Opstal, co-founder and executive director of Chasing Justice, a movement mobilizing young leaders at the intersection of faith and justice. Sandra is a global speaker, preacher, and activist with deep roots in urban ministry. She continues to serve in Chicago with Lawndale Christian Community Church and is the author of several justice-centered books, including The Next Worship and Rally. She holds an MDiv and is currently pursuing doctoral work at North Park Seminary, grounding her prophetic leadership in both scholarship and lived practice. Through Chasing Justice, Sandra has built a national platform equipping young BIPOC leaders to integrate worship, discipleship, and activism. Her work insists that justice is not an optional add-on to the gospel, but actually central to Christian formation. You'll hear it throughout our conversation with Sandra. Aaron, what stood out to you as we were visiting with Sandra?
Wow. Well, I'm going to be, I think, chewing on what I learned from Sandra for a long time. But a sentence that kind of stopped me in my tracks was when she was speaking about what sustains her work in the midst of profound challenge of justice work. And she said, because my heart has grown larger. And then she said, our hearts can grow larger. They can be large enough to hold that. It's a muscle we can exercise. And of course, that's what she's pointing us to, her work that says, as we worship God in truth and life, we become more and more like the God that we worship. So I found that to be moving, convicting, and so inspiring.
Yeah. The integration between how she is living her life, the love that she is pouring into her children and her neighbors, the love she's receiving, the way it is foundational to how they are making decisions about budget and their home and how they empower others to think about what it means to be a neighbor and to love well and to pursue justice. Like it's so integrated. It really challenges me to look at my own life and how I'm thinking about how my life is integrated. So, yeah, it's profound. Let's listen to our conversation with Reverend Sandra Van Opstal. Sandra, thank you for being with us today.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. All right. We're going to jump right in. So when you reflect on your journey into ministry and justice work, what were some of the formative experiences that shaped your sense of call?
The first thing that comes to mind is growing up in the context of an immigrant family. So for me, the idea that the world was not as it should be, I learned that very young. And I understood that at a very young age. And so I think I had like antennas, up, and I was paying attention to things that maybe other children weren't paying attention to. Maybe very much so like the kids in our community right now. They're having to pay attention to and prepare for things that many children don't. So for me, the idea of the world is not as it should be came at a super young age, not necessarily because my family unit was not a safe place, but because the world in which my family unit lived in was not necessarily created and made for us. And so I think as a young child, I congregated in the context of a Catholic tradition and Catholic church. And so a strong social ethic and understanding of Jesus and the Gospels, like all that in my faith formation was very live. So it was like, oh yeah, Jesus cares about the world. And if the world isn't as it should be, then it's our responsibility to make a difference. And so I would, do neighborhood things. I would write letters to toy companies when I wanted something that I thought needed to be more fair. And my mom would keep all these little small things I would do as kind of reminders to me that the passions that I have started super young, like 5, 6 years old.
Wow. So really in your faith formation, a sense of justice being the expression of the gospel was just integral, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would attend a local Spanish-speaking Catholic parish with my grandmother and my mom, and the people that would go to that church were not necessarily the people that I lived around. So we lived in an experience of like upward mobility, but when we would go to church, it was with the folks in the part of our community that were really just entering their experience of assimilation into, the American experience. And so I would hear things as we would eat meals and as we would hear sermons. And so for me, the ideas of a more just world and our faith were incredibly interconnected. And they actually came apart during my discipleship in the broader Christian experience. And then they came back together as an adult.
Okay. You've always connected worship with justice in your work. And I'm curious if there was sort of a moment where you realized that worship was, in fact, the place where you encounter the call toward justice.
It's interesting because I thought it was later in life, and as I was reflecting on that question, I realized that it was for freshman, sophomore year of college, I think, when I was just beginning to like encounter scripture study for the first time. We did a study in the woman at the well, and I think the Gospels and the story of Jesus as Jesus interacted with the most marginalized really provoked something in me, like, okay, this is the Jesus I think I grew up with. I found him again. And then the other thing was just that the line from the Gospels that, we neither worship on that mountain or in that space or place or in that temple. We worship God in spirit and in truth. And that really stuck with me. I was like, oh, that feels right. That resonates with me. It's like our worship of God is how we live in the world. Our worship of God is what we do with all of who we are. And so therefore, worship has to go beyond musical expression, which is what I trained for. I trained for music. So, but it has to go beyond this. So.
Nice.
Wow. I love hearing that story. I'm just thinking about all the times that I have heard justice work and worship contrasted. And you're saying, no way. Can you talk a little bit about what you see in communities when the communities that you're invested in begin to see this integrality from the gospel that you're carrying forward right now? What happens in groups of people as they start to wake up to what you're just describing in your own journey?
Dear mentor and friend of mine, Mark Laberton, writes in his book, The Dangerous Act of Worship, he says something like, the dangerous act of worship is waking up to God in the world. And so I think he has this kind of chapter around that idea. And I believe that that's what happens when we marry our deepest affection for God and the deepest needs that we see in the world around us. So as an example, Sunday morning, I had such a powerful encounter in worship. I haven't had that in years. Like, I don't know what happened. I don't know if I came in more open or something about the space, the way the congregation was already worshiping. But the theme of worship that morning, this past Sunday, was trusting in God. And I congregate in the context of an all-Black church on the west side of Chicago that has, the congregants have seen some things, they have experienced some things. We have had Sundays where we've been able to celebrate someone that's returning after an unjust incarceration. We've had celebrations of grandchildren that have been literally lost and now they're found. And I experienced of God like this deep presence, like, yes, I can trust you. I can trust you. And while all is happening in our world, like war and poverty and personal sickness and illness and disease, and we just lost a close friend to cancer, and I was like, and my kids are like, I hate cancer. I was like, I hate cancer too. And we're just processing all that's wrong. And my son would say, Mom, that's because of sin in the world, right? Like, that's because of sin. And then we have to explain to him what happened at the fall and how things disintegrated. And so we're having these deep theological conversations with our young children on the way to church. We get to church, and it's just simple songs, simple choruses that we're going to trust in God. And that God has been there for us, and God has, repeating of the stories of Scripture. And I could not help but dance. Like I was dancing, and our church is not a lot of dancing. There's a lot of older people. It's not a lot of dancing. And so I was like, I don't care. I'm going to dance. And I saw the worship leader was like, thank you, Sandra, because she was dancing. Something happened in me where I was like, if you can look at the world and see what is really happening in this world that we live in and confront the injustice, like confronted me, like name it and name the injustice and name the evil and name like even the decisions that individuals make to harm another individual. If you can look at that and say, in the midst of all of that, there is a God who sees and is present and is about restoring those things. If you can hold both of those things together, then I think your worship just deepens. And so I didn't think like I'm singing songs because I'm pretending that we're not at war right now. I'm singing these songs because we are at war. And our siblings who have bombs dropping on them right now are also singing these songs. And so by uniting my voice to their voice and proclaiming something that is truer than the truth that we see with our very own eyes, there is something that unlocks in us that creates hope and imagination and energy and courage to then do the work of justice.
Oh my gosh. Let's go. Let's go do this, right? I'm aware that this has just formed and shaped your life and your ministry. Like, I mean, you are not just talking about this, you're living it and doing it. And you've co-founded Chasing Justice, which has become this national organization and movement. And I'd love for you to describe it for someone who is hearing about Chasing Justice for the first time. Perhaps a little bit about how it came to be, but what it does.
Yeah. So Chasing Justice is a community that mobilizes young people towards a lifestyle of faith and justice. So our vision or our idea is that we can see a world where young leaders are inspired by their faith. They're just like, my faith in God inspires me to do something about this world, and we equip them to do that work. And so it is a community of people that is primarily virtual, of people between the ages of 18 and 30-ish, and 30-ish. And we provide formation materials. We provide like Advent guides and Lent resources and pilgrimages they can go on to go visit places like the west side of Chicago to see what churches are doing. Learning communities where they can come around some curriculum and ask questions about what does it look like to be civically engaged and to, utilize our particular passions or vocations in the work of rebuilding a just world. So, and then it's specifically led by people of color. So what we found was that there were all these really great organizations out there doing justice work, but they saw themselves as more solving a problem that was in a space and place or for a people that wasn't themselves. And that's helpful. We need allies and partners, but we said, what if we had a movement, an organization that was actually led by the very people who are most impacted by systems of injustice? And we provided a way forward. We messaged our journeys. We didn't have people tell our stories. We told our own stories. We created our own curriculum. And so an example of that would be, a lot of the allyship guides that are out there right now, when we think about how do we stand in solidarity with one another, they're really written for majority white folks to understand marginalized communities. Well, that isn't our journey. Our journey is understanding our own marginalization and then saying, even though our communities go through this, is there a way that we can stand in solidarity with other communities that are marginalized and also advocate for the issues that impact them? So Black and Brown communities on the west side of Chicago, American folks of color to our Ukrainian and Palestinian and Venezuelan brothers and sisters around the world. So the allyship guide we developed is not an allyship guide for people with significant racial and social and economic power to help us. It's actually written for us to work together to say, hey, when these systems fail us, we got us, we're here. We're going to do this together. So that would be an example of the kind of curriculum and the kind of work that we're doing.
It's really powerful and so critical right now in a time of polarization to really access power and voice and place and connection. And I'm just inspired by this, Sandra. So thank you for what you're doing. And it feels notable that this is coming from a place of faith. And I'm curious if and how you are engaging local churches in this work.
Yeah, for sure. We're partnering with local churches primarily so for example, in our pilgrimage experiences, we pretty much exclusively work with the local church as the center or the base of that experience. And then the nonprofits that church engages with. So whether it's elected officials, nonprofits, small businesses, whoever's in their ecosystem.
Okay.
And we're like, hey, look at how this church is working with other entities to make a difference in the community around them. In our Live Justly Intensive, which is our online virtual community where we go through a 4-session curriculum, that is led by myself and another pastor from Florida. And that's interwoven into the context of hey, how do you do this in community? How do you do this locally? Particularly for a generation that really, I think, is focused on the digital space and the macro. So it's war, they want to address war. It's great. We should. And here's actually how you do it. By electing folks that will, when they speak out and make decisions about our international policy, they are holding the values that you hold as a person of faith. They may themselves even not be a person of faith, but they're holding those values as they're exercising their decision-making power. So I think the church for us is at the center because we believe that the work is local, and therefore some of the most powerful institutions in communities is the church. I mean, elected officials know that if they want something to happen in the city of Chicago, they're going to contact the clergy. That's why there's clergy coalitions. That's why there's clergy gatherings. In Pasadena, for example, a friend of mine who runs the Pasadena Clergy Coalition something in Pasadena, and it's the police department, the fire department, clergy, small businesses. And when the fires happened in that area in Altadena, Pasadena, it was the clergy that people went to help mobilize people. So I think that is still true. I think it's different now. But definitely the church is at the center of the work. At least for us in Chasing Justice, it is. I mean, I'm a pastor. I'm very churchy. I always tell people I'm churchy. I'm a pastor, and you're not going to take that away from me. Like, I don't take that off to go into the neighborhood. I keep my collar on, and so that's the function that I have. And I absolutely realize that there are places like detention centers, like hospitals, like prisons that they actually won't let anybody in but the lawyer or the clergy, because they also realize as institutions that the spiritual nurture of folks that are in the context of detention, incarceration, or who are fighting illness, that is going to provide flourishing in that space.
Yeah. And that they know that the church and all that it represents is right there with them. And I love that you're wearing your collar and you're saying, I'm a churchy person, as you're working with young people and helping them think about how they engage their faith, live out their faith, stretch it, make it work. One more kind of follow-up question to the Chasing Justice work before we move on. And I would love to know, like, how do young people learn about you, get engaged with you? Are you, do you have avenues to invite folks to be part of it? Like, how is that, like, in a really I'm just getting really tactical here, but in a really practical way, how does that work?
I mean, I wish more people knew about us. Honestly, we're young. We just started about in the middle of the lockdown, so we're still kind of in our beginning stages. We don't have big budgets, so we don't do any kind of advertising or anything like that. So the way that we've done it is through social media. So our biggest imprint is on Instagram. And with some things on TikTok, some things on LinkedIn, some things on YouTube, which we're just starting we're a little behind on YouTube, but people under 30 are gathered in a digital space.
Yeah.
And that's where they're getting their news. Like I see even my sons at 11, they're like, when they want to look something up, they don't Google, they go to Instagram, they go to YouTube. And so when they Google faith and justice, we're hoping that the SEO engines are working and they find us somewhere, faith and justice, Chasing Justice. We have a podcast as well, on Spotify and iTunes and all that kind of stuff. So, we work with networks. So we work with, for example, college ministries. We work with, some denominations. We work with CCDA, the Christian Community Development Association. So our job is kind of networking with other like-minded people who may have a desire for their young leaders to be discipled in this way, but they don't necessarily, they can't add that on to their current thing. And so we would host a networking session in partnership with them, or the pilgrimages that we're hosting, we're doing in partnership with a lot of different organizations, like local leaders, local churches, the Christian university that happens to be there, the chaplaincy office. So we're trying our best to kind of get the word out, but it is slow going, because the other thing we learned was that, and maybe you all have some research in this too, but the institutions are not really what young people are following. So they're not going to be like, let me follow Chasing Justice. They'll follow a personality. And so we're not really set up like that. And we don't want to be. So sometimes my team will be like, Sandra, do more content, put your face out there more. Still, because then it's like Sandra is the face of Chasing Justice. But I'm like, Chasing Justice is all of us. And I'm the old lady. So clearly I'm not under 30. So please don't put me on, like, I don't want our logo to be me with a pair of earrings. Like, that's not going to be me. So, but there is institutional distrust. And so they're looking for influencers maybe that are attached to us, that they follow, that they could also, so it's not been slow, but it's maybe we're still working that out. Even this week I had, I don't know, 5 or 6 calls with denominations and organizations about the next series that we're doing, so that we can see if there's ways people want to collaborate and or how that would serve them. We have a curriculum that we're writing called Making Things Good, and it is for youth and youth leaders and youth. And we're in the beginning stages of it. And so we're putting together focus groups and listening communities. And my hope is that those would also be avenues to collaborate.
Nice.
Sandra, I'd love to dig in a little bit around the young people that you're working with. So you named 18 to 30-ish. So, like Gen Z or millennials. I want to know what you love about the generations of early stage adults that you're working with. What are you seeing in them? And what are they bringing to the table, actually, that the church so dearly needs right now?
Yeah. Well, what I have learned in this process, first of all, is that I'm working with two different generations that are very distinct, and the research collaborates and corroborates that. So, young millennials, which is more of what I was used to with working with InterVarsity, working at a church that was very young. It's a different set of values and I think charisms, like a different set of gifts I think they're bringing than Gen Z. But Gen Z, I think. There's a little bit more data out on them now, but I think what we're finding is they're already adults, by the way. They're 25, they're 24, 25, they're grown. They're working and purchasing homes if they can and having jobs. And so it's interesting to watch that stage versus the conversations around Gen Z when they were 18, because some of that's just developmental, But yeah, I love it. I love it so much that I was an executive pastor at a church, and I left that job so that I could work with young people again and take some risks. I think that maybe scared my husband, but I love that stage between I have a paycheck, I finally have a paycheck, and I don't have a mortgage.
Hmm.
There is something so beautiful about the possibility. And then once you have a mortgage, there's just no more possibility. Then you're thinking about did I pick a house in the right school district? I have a friend, Paco Amador, who is a pastor at New Life in Little Village, and everyone should look him up. And he used to come and speak to our students when I would run the Chicago Urban Program with InterVarsity. And he would say, "Do you want to live in a nice condo on Michigan Avenue overlooking the lake? No! You want to live in a rat-infested apartment on the way?" He would do "Do you want this? No, you want this." And he would say now is the time to live. Now is the time to take those chances. When you're single and you don't have to make decisions with someone else. When you're young marrieds and you don't have to make decisions that impact your children. And then those things just become normalized. Oh, there are gunshots in our community. That's not good or normal, but we're not going to leave because we hear gunshots here. Because that's just a part of life for many people. So you're able to, you're so moldable. You're so willing. And I think that goes away as you get older. I mean, at least it did for me. And I think that probably there's some research out there, So I love it. I would say just that stage is what I love. And so after 25 years of ministry, I returned back to that stage, here I am again. I think also specifically because I work primarily with people of color and allies, these are not people that I'm convincing that justice is important or that there's injustice in the Bible or injustice in our world, but that the Bible very clearly invites us to live a life of justice. So I think that the particular work Chasing Justice does is collecting these folks that are I want to make a difference in the world, and I believe that we can. And my church space isn't necessarily helping me prepare for that practically. So anybody got any ideas? And then they all get in a room and they're well, I'm doing this. I don't know if that's right or not, but I'm doing this. And then they'll come to a pilgrimage and they'll visit our home and they'll be "Why do you live here? How come you're doing that with your neighbor? Why'd you guys take your fences down?" And then we're having conversations around everyday life. Tell me about why you shop there, order there, spend your money there, invest there, save there, all the practicalities of adulting. And because it's primarily people that are already on board with the spiritual ideas of living a lifestyle of justice, we're not having to argue or convince. We're just exploring possibilities together. So I think that is what is really life-giving for me. It's not that it's not hard because, for example, in one of our Live Justly intensives, I remember having a conversation with young Black folks that are first to go to college we talked about the acquisition of wealth and how do we do that in just ways, and what about how these companies that we invest in impact the world. And it was very hard. It was like, Mom, I'm the first person in my family to get an education. I'm the first person to even have a 401k. And now you're telling me that I can't just put it in the most lucrative fund. And I'm like, no, because you can't protest incarceration and then invest in private prisons. You can't do that. It lacks integrity. Mm-hmm. And so they're difficult conversations we're having about like, well, it's fine if a white person moves to the west side of Chicago because no one's going to shoot them. But if I'm raising my young Black children as a Black man on the west side of Chicago, then their experience is different. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. As someone who grew up in the city and moved out and then had to tell my mom I was moving back in, those are very hard conversations. And so it's not that it's not difficult, but it is with people who are wanting to make a difference. So I love it. I think that this generation is innovative. I think that this generation is not going to play like they're not going to play polite. They're going to look for true collaboration and solidarity and peace. I think they're unwilling to say, well, that's just the way it's done around here. You know, like we survived it, so you should too. So I think there's something about the disappointment that moves to action. I think they're a lot less sad and a lot more angry. And I think anger is an active emotion. Sad can be a very passive one. So I would rather work with disgruntled, angry young people who don't like the world as it is, and then introduce them to a God who actually understands that and wants to do something about it, and kind of soften the edges on that than to try to wake someone up.
Yeah, you've got really good raw material there, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I want to go back to something you touched on earlier and just go a little deeper. You were talking about, a conversation that might be had in a group that is doing this work where they are really upset and wanting to think about the war and what can we do? And you're bringing them back to the local experience of here's what you do locally. You elect folks to represent you who will ask hard questions and those kinds of things. So I want to dig in a little bit around what it means to stay local and to engage locally, because you're now part of a ministry that has national influence, that is touching the lives of different folks across the country. And yet you remain deeply rooted in your Chicago neighborhood. And I'd love for you to speak about what staying local has meant for your leadership, how it has shaped it, and what you take into your leadership and your work with young leaders around what it means to be grounded locally.
I told someone the other day, sometimes in the world that we live in, people think that the work that we do are the words that we put on Instagram or on LinkedIn or on Twitter, whatever, social media you use. But for me, the things that I say publicly are the fruit and result of what I do here in private with my neighbors, to love them, to stand alongside of them, to check in on them, to learn from them, So for me, I can speak to a policy on immigration that is very, broad in the sense of like it's a national thing that's happening, but I'm speaking to it from the perspective of a neighbor who's watching, for example, my children's classrooms shrink in size because kids are afraid to go to school and the parents are rallying to figure out how to get homework to those children and to get them on to a remote learning experience because it's just too scary. It's the grocery shopping that we do for our neighbors who cannot leave the home. It's the walking school buses where we walk each other's children to school. It's the receiving and coaching for returning citizens who are looking for a job after many, many years of being incarcerated and kind of coming back into a completely different social experience because the world has changed in that time that they were inside. it's giving. I mean, honestly, I think just giving when you're around people who are, and you see the disparity economically, you're just going to be invited to become a generous person. It doesn't mean you will become a generous person, but you will be invited to become one. And so an example for us, even very small, is, we purchased a three flat home. It's a large Victorian home on the west side of Chicago. And little by little, as we had the funding, we repaired and gutted the upstairs and the downstairs, and families moved in. This was early on. They've lived there at least 13 years. And right now, my kids are growing up, and we only have 3 tiny bedrooms in our home.
Mm-hmm.
So let me get this real specific, 3 tiny bedrooms. And one of them was an office for my husband. And so the kids were like, we want our own room. I understand. So then we're like, well, what do we do? Because we don't have any, where do we work now? And so we had a family conversation and family decisions around how much space is really needed and how much space do we prefer. And I think those are lessons that we learn to ask, how much do I need to consume or have to actually be comfortable in this world? And so we made the decision not to ask any of our neighbors to move out so that we could have more space, but to transition one of my children into this tiniest bedroom, and then to move my husband's office into this room that you're in right now, which is also my bedroom. And then I had to get rid of my entire closet and one dresser. And so I purged about 70% of what I owned. And I feel awesome about it. And so those are things that we are thinking about as a family. Like every few years, we're asking questions. My kids will be like, why can't we go to Disney World? I'm like, we totally can. Your dad makes really good money. But that's not how we spend our money as a family. So we'll budget to go on vacation. That's not in our budget this year. And we've decided to do other things with our resources that is producing this fruit over here. And so our hope is that even as aunties and as uncles and as parents, you're teaching a generation that's emerging to think about consumption and resources and generosity. I believe that the learning edge for this generation is going to be generosity. I think that for all that is said about the missions movement and all the things that the generation that came before me did wrong, I know some very generous old people, like really generous, and I don't see that in the same distinctive way. And so that's why for me, the local thing allows you to go, there are actually people in need every day. Do I really need a $12 coffee 5 days a week? Probably not. Or maybe, yes, that's in my budget. That's what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to buy a luxury car and pay a high car payment. Whatever, all those practical adulting things, I think those are things you learn locally. You can't learn that. The other thing is, and then I'll breathe. The other thing is how we fight, how we argue, how we disagree. So for example, in the virtual space, you're like, oh, they don't believe the same thing I do. Like, I cancel them. They're toxic. They're gone. Or can you believe them? That's abusive. In the local space, you're working with faith leaders that are from very different traditions.
Yeah.
And interfaith spaces. And you can't just be like, well, what is their policy on women in the pulpit? Even though I believe we should be, what is their policy on marriage and sexuality? What is their policy on X, Y, and Z? What we're looking at, we need housing for our neighbors.
Yeah.
We need safe passageway for our immigrant neighbors. We need food in a food desert. So while we may have very real and important disagreements, the local space keeps you focused on the work and the mission of flourishing, and not necessarily that we all agree on all of the importantly held spiritual beliefs. And I think that is something you can't get online. It teaches you to be in a room even though you disagree. So you will now show up for Thanksgiving.
I feel like I just listened to an immense amount of wisdom right there, and the kind of challenge that comes from integrity, actually saying and doing the same thing. And as you were speaking about local engagement and the kind of like the inescapability of doing, because you're not in the world of ideas, you're in the world of neighbors, people,
Mhm.
and choices. You're talking about tremendous impact. I want to know how you sustain
Mm.
yourself in those spaces, how you sustain the joy that you carry with you. What are the practices that for you and your community have become sort of vital to live the life that you just so beautifully described to us?
As I think about the work of neighboring, which is really the work that we're doing, and just loving and being kind to one another, I believe we have an amazing ability to have our hearts enlarged and to stretch as people. So I feel like oftentimes people will ask me like, how you're doing so much. How do you do it? I mean, yes, we're very busy. My family's very involved. We like it that way. We like to keep going, but it has more to do with what our hearts can hold, what our hearts have been able to hold. So, we work in an interfaith, interethnic space here in our neighborhood. And so I'm able to hold not just immigration, but other sectors and issues of justice because my heart has expanded. It's a muscle that now has expanded.
Mhm.
And I believe the way it has expanded is by allowing our lives to, I think the way that it's expanded is by embracing other people into our lives and having a space of hospitality. So it's not about like, I see this as a problem with the world and I want to fix it. It's about, I have invited this person into my life and I have embraced them as Miroslav Volf says, I have embraced them. And now I have a love for them. So how am I not going to speak out on the issues that impact them? I'm never going to go anywhere and not say anything about our terrible immigration policies because they have impacted my family, they have impacted my neighbors, and they're wrong. We have children who are in prison right now. And so we can open our hearts to one another. Our hearts have the capacity to hold that. They really do. The Spirit of God gives us that ability. So I think I have sustained it because I'm enjoying my neighbors. I love my neighbors. We garden together. They take care of my chickens when I'm gone. We throw block parties. We celebrate one another's accomplishments and the graduations of our children, and we protest together and march when it's necessary. But most of our lives are not, doing the work of justice. They're just loving one another and enjoying one another. So I love my neighborhood. I wouldn't, like the other day where I was talking about, like, can't imagine living in a box downtown, like in the sky. I can't even, like, where would you garden? Where would you see your neighbor walking their dog? So it's not a life for us. We love it. Where we live, we enjoy it. I once had a student who, when they were visiting, was like, they kept pointing out everything that was wrong with the neighborhood and how they would fix it. And I was like, I really appreciate your heart for justice. Totally appreciate it. But if the only thing you can see here is what's wrong, please don't move here. Do not move here. If you can't see the beauty, if you can't see the gifts, if you can't see the rest right here, I don't need to leave to go rest. I rest right here in my backyard in a hammock with my chickens in the orchard that my neighbor planted. So I think that for me, the sustainability is in not separating the work of justice that I do with my rest. I'm actually resting here, and I find rest on the bike path behind my house, and I find rest at the park talking to other parents and telling stories and laughing about our parents, that's a big component. It's like, how do you actually approach your life is integrated and not disintegrated? And then the second thing is a whole lot of therapy, a whole lot of spiritual direction, a whole lot of silent retreat. Like, I believe in all those practices. So, and I started young in ministry. So in my 20s, when I was on staff with the university, they taught us how to have a retreat day, a retreat of silence afternoon, what spiritual direction was. So I believe in all of the helps: acupuncture, chiropractic, massage therapy, like all the things that we carry in our bodies. I see a massage therapist once a month. And she is not kind to my, she will work all the stress out of those muscles. And then I feel like, okay, I can do another day. So please, folks, people that are confronting 400 years of injustice, we do this work in community, and we do this work, I think, surrounded by what I would call a healing community. All those parts of us that need healing.
I feel like, as Erin said, we have just sat in the presence of wisdom. And I'm so grateful for this time that we've gotten together, Sandra. I'm grateful for the work that you are doing, the ministry, and the way you are raising your family and being a neighbor. I am so moved, and I am filled with hope today. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, it's the life we've chosen. Sometimes we sit around and go, wow, we really chose this for ourselves, didn't we? And we have we have found the kind of what people say about, Jesus is with the marginalized. I think I've experienced that's true, because I think we're again, like I said earlier, just confronted with naming how bad things really are in this world, not hiding from that or trying to manicure it, but then just finding God in the midst of that. And I think we're in good company with our global siblings. A majority of the church lives in the context of poverty and suffering. A majority of the world is suffering. And they have found the courage and the hope to keep going. So that's where I want to be. Like, I want to be tutored and nurtured by those communities. And I'm really hoping that it impacts my children.
May it be so for all of us.